At first, it feels like guidance, little corrections, sharpened tones that evaluate everything from your posture to your choices. But over years, those tiny critiques accumulate and settle into your nervous system. A child looks at a father the way sailors look at the horizon, as a reference point for reality. When that horizon tilts, everything else tilts with it. A father who speaks through criticism trains a child's mind to treat all gestures as a test. Everything becomes an audition. You begin to hear his voice inside your own, a private judge who waits for you to fall short. The tragic brilliance of this dynamic is that the father's words eventually vanish, but his tone stays forever, quietly embedded in your internal monologue. Psychologists call this introjected authority, the parent's voice migrating into the child's psyche and becoming the child's own voice. What makes introjected authority so unique is that it doesn't feel like influence, it feels like identity. Children accept it as normal because that they have no comparison point. If the parent sighs when the child speaks, soon the child sighs internally at their own thoughts. If the parent critiques effort, soon the child critiques every attempt before the world sees it. The authority doesn't live above them, it lives inside them. It becomes a lens through which they approach literally everything. It becomes a ruling voice that continues long after the external authority figure stops speaking. It governs through tone rather than logic. The strangest part is that introjected authority often feels protective at first. It tells the child, if you anticipate every flaw, no one can hurt you. It promises safety through self-critique. It trains the child to believe that hyper-awareness equals strength. And the child trusts it because it wears the accent of someone they depended on. But this protection carries a cost. The inner voice rarely evolves. A parent's tone from decades ago continues dictating the adult's present-day possibilities. A 30-year-old with a brilliant mind still hears the grammar of a 10-year-old's fears. Decisions become filtered through old rules. Desires shrink because the voice insists they're too bold. Confidence stalls because the voice whispers, careful, even in moments of opportunity. But this protection carries a cost. The inner voice rarely evolves. A parent's tone from decades ago continues dictating the adult's present-day possibilities. A 30-year-old with a brilliant mind still hears the grammar of a 10-year-old's fears. Decisions become filtered through old rules. Desires shrink because the voice insists they're too bold. Confidence stalls because the voice whispers, careful, even in moments of opportunity. You grow up scanning his face the way a meteorologist scans storms, reading micro-expressions, forecasting mood shifts, preparing for impact. What begins as survival becomes a habit of mind. You start reading everyone this way. Even as an adult, you can sense a shift in someone's breathing, and your body prepares for judgment. It's not fear. It's familiarity. The nervous system loves what it knows. Inside homes like this, affection feels rationed. You receive it in controlled doses, as if warmth must be saved for special occasions. This teaches you that love must be deserved through performance. You study harder, behave better, excel constantly, believing excellence summons tenderness. The cruel twist is that excellence often triggers even tighter expectations. He sets the bar higher because he trusts your capacity, and you take the raised bar as failure. In some mythic traditions, it is well known that a father's judgment forms a kind of shadow twin, a presence that stalks you through adulthood. In the old Mesopotamian stories, the shadow twin appears as the sadhu, a spirit double that follows a person from childhood. Originally it was protective, but when a father's voice dominates the household, the sadhu mutates. It becomes a companion that guards but also monitors. Its task becomes preservation of the father's standards inside the child's skull. Gilgamesh fears this presence when he rages that, "My heart has become two," a poetic way of saying he carries an inner critic that does not match his true desires. Literature captures it well too. Kafka's novel is the ultimate portrait of a young mind twisted by paternal scrutiny, living inside the echo of not enough. His letter to his father, is one of the most precise autopsies of a confidence that never had a chance to form. The whole document reads like a man trying to map the architecture of a prison. He has lived in so long, it feels like home. Kafka doesn't simply describe fear. He describes inherited measurement standards, so absolute that they became the laws of his inner world. He writes that his father's authority was monumental, a word he chooses carefully. Monuments do not move. They do not negotiate. They simply stand and dwarf everything around them. Kafka remembers being physically small and emotionally magnified by shame, because every gesture was sized against a paternal scale so large he felt absurd for even trying to meet it. His father's booming voice, his certainty, his impatience. Kafka absorbed these as definitions of what a valid human looks like. And since he never resembled that model, he grew into a man who experienced his own selfhood as a kind of trespass. Kafka identifies very well how the father's judgments became axioms, unquestionable truths that structured his emotional geometry. He also describes something painfully recognizable to adult children of critical fathers: the way love and fear get braided. Kafka adored his father's strength. He longed for approval from the same source that burned him. This fusion creates what modern psychologists call attachment ambivalence, but Kafka captures it more poetically. He says he carried the weight of your presence even in your absence. It's the childhood logic of someone who believes that a father's critique is simply the world telling the truth. Confidence grows from two elements: a sense of safety and a sense of capability. A critical father fractures both. The child receives attention without warmth and structure without gentleness. You learn capability through praise that believes in your effort. You learn safety through affection that exists even when you fail. A critical father offers structure without the emotional container that allows a child to feel steady. So the child becomes skillful, yet insecure, competent, yet self-doubting. They execute tasks brilliantly while constantly scanning for mistakes. They become adults who achieve enormously while feeling fraudulent inside, because their accomplishments were always measured against an impossible, moving standard. This creates a peculiar wound. You start trusting your father's doubt more than your own talent. You enter adulthood with a reflexive suspicion toward your successes. You minimize achievements because somewhere inside you still expect criticism to arrive. You hesitate to try new things because you imagine his tone tightening, even if he's no longer around. In relationships, you unconsciously gravitate toward people who recreate that familiar emotional climate. People who critique you in subtle ways. People who withhold approval. People whose love feels conditional. The psyche seeks the shape it knows. And yet, within this wound lives a strange, intense strength, the capacity for self-reflection. People raised by critical fathers develop sharp inner vision. They know how to evaluate and analyze. The problem is simply that they point that vision at themselves with merciless precision. Healing comes from turning that same analytic skill outward, toward understanding where that internal judge came from, what shaped him, what he carried, and what he was unable to give. A critical father rarely criticizes from cruelty alone. Often he himself was raised inside pressure, perfectionism, or emotional scarcity. He tries to prepare his child for a world he perceives as harsh. In doing so, he replaces encouragement with vigilance, and the child grows up fluent in vigilance but starved of assurance. Confidence returns slowly, like a language you once spoke fluently and are relearning as an adult. It begins when you realize that the critical voice inside you carries your father's accent, and it continues when you start imagining what a supportive internal father might sound like. A voice that values effort, steadiness, and sincerity instead of flawlessness. It solidifies when you surround yourself with people who speak to you in ways that build rather than bruise. Yet, here's the part that often surprises you. People genuinely like you. They feel safe with you because your childhood trained you to notice things others miss. Your empathy comes from reading moods as survival. Your calm comes from years of negotiating tension. Your sensitivity comes from learning how to keep peace in unpredictable environments. What felt like weakness at home becomes strength in the world. Healing for people like you usually begins with one small, almost accidental realization. One day you speak to yourself in a tone that belongs to you. People raised by critical fathers often become adults who carry quiet oceans inside them, deep, self-contained, layered. You learn to live with complexity, to feel deeply without drowning. You build your confidence from the inside out, carefully, slowly, in your own language. And in that process, you become the person the child version of you always deserved to meet. This is how you make your dad proud, by developing your own voice.